previously on In Transition.
Yeah. So I think through that, like, I was talking with somebody and they're like, you seem like you're kind of into like marketing and like telling a story and stuff like that. So I kind of started doing a little bit of that when I came back to the States and doing some social media and like freelance marketing stuff. Like through kayaking again, I kind of got connected to this woman who she had worked for a nonprofit that they worked with women in Afghanistan and doing rugs, like hand woven rugs, because it was one of the few opportunities for women in Afghanistan to earn income at the time because they could do it in their homes, especially in areas outside of, Kabul and more remote areas. And so I was doing some work with them. I kind of got tied into this outdoor festival in Asheville and, kind of took over their marketing and redid their website and worked with people on that. So I kind of fell into that kind of creative space. And then I realized very quickly, like, I don't care about digital marketing and like everything's about optimizing and SEO and all that crap that I couldn't care less about. It's just like not me. Cause for me, it's more about community and events and telling the stories and stuff. And that's what I liked about marketing at the time. So that's kind of where I went next at that point. And then eventually I moved to DC from there and worked with a tech startup in the food space, doing some marketing with them. So that kind of brought me in. That's what I was like, oh, that'll get me back to quote the real world and a real job and, tech startup space and that kind of, that path, which then also took a hard left in the not so near future. So.
Yeah. Like, what do you think about the real world these days?
Sorry, we have a foster dog, so you might hear her in the background. I think, quote, the real world is overhyped, in my opinion. I think it's something I've thought a lot about in the past few years, and especially in the past, couple of years. So I'm in a transition phase kind of again, and I think the real world is whatever you want it to be. Like if I wanted to pick up and move back to New Zealand, it'd be a little bit harder because I'm partnered now. But
he doesn't want to go with you.
He's in a very good. He loves his current role and what he's doing, and he's growing a ton. And I told him, I was like, in the next 5 years, I would love to live somewhere else. Again and whatnot. So that's kind of on our radar for the future. But
we are so excited to be back for part 2 of this conversation. If you haven't listened to part 1, we encourage you to go back and take a listen. Now on to the show.
I think it's something, I think that's something actually good about social media a lot of times is that you can see that people live in wildly different ways, whether that's becoming a Airbnb real estate magnate or being an artist who finds a following and a crew and can sell their art, through social media or, that you can kind of create your life in different ways. Obviously, there's still a lot of pressure as far as like having a mortgage and jobs and how do you generate that income and stuff. I think that's obviously the tether to quote the real world. But, if you work at it or, take the risk and stuff, you can kind of create your own world. It's just, there's risks in everything. And there's a woman I follow and, she's all about buying like small businesses, like car washes and laundromats and everything. And she's just got a really interesting take. And it's just like, choose your hard, right? Like sitting in a W-2 job that you hate. And, kind of having to figure out that career path is hard. Being an entrepreneur is hard. Living without income is hard. So choose your hard, and then, So I think that's a really good saying that she has.
That is actually.
It's all hard. So figure out which hard you want to pursue because it's in a direction that you want to go. So.
Yeah. And I feel like in listening to everything you're saying, like the thing I'm hearing the most and the thing that I think a lot of women struggle with is to release control. Or like in coaching, I always tell people it's like we have to learn to release the outcome.
Yeah.
Like we're always striving for like this is what I want to happen exactly.
Yep.
And it doesn't always work out the way we think. But when you start to get in that flow space, which it sounds like you've been in and out of, like just I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to put myself in positions where this feels really in alignment. And let's just see what happens. And you're not trying to control it too much. Like, let's see marketing. You're like, you didn't think you were going to go into marketing, I bet. You're just kind of like, oh, this feels right. And then when it doesn't, you're kind of like, okay, Which direction do I want to start steering myself?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to release the control.
Yeah.
It's so hard. I think most women, I know me, I'm super type A and I've got spreadsheets and checklists for everything. And, it drives my partner nuts at times. So I'm like, this is the million things to do, but it's also, it helps organize a lot of things and allows me to be free in other ways. But yeah, letting go of control is not something I'm good at. When people are like, well, things just happen, like it just all comes together. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's because somebody else has spreadsheets and they're making it happen for you. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah. Yes, it doesn't just happen, but
you'd be like, oh,
yeah, it's like intention. I always go back to this, like, you can still have intention and release control, right?
Mm-hmm.
I intentionally move in this direction. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but talk to me a little bit, Kat, about how you learn to trust yourself. Like, what is your experience with learning to like trust your instincts as you move through what would seem like kind of a crazy life to some people? Like, you've done all these things, you've moved all these places, and you've kind of just trusted that it was going to work out or it was going to be fine, or, how do you navigate that?
Well, yeah, I think sometimes it's like, especially when I made that decision to kind of quit and move, like, I don't even think that was trusting in myself. I think it was like in such a black hole that I didn't even really think about it. It was just kind of like, you have got to do something to get yourself out of this hole and, get away from him and just kind of this whole situation. And so it wasn't really thinking or trusting. It was just like, fuck this. I'm out. Like it was kind of that decision. And I think that's actually a really good and healthy thing, because otherwise I would have sat there and spun and analyzed and, tried to over organize things. I think learning to trust yourself, at least for me, is very much an ongoing process, because I'm very unaligned right now. And I know I am, and I know I need to make a change. I just don't know what it is. And I'm in that process right now of spinning and trying to control it and getting an analysis paralysis of which direction should I move in, and is what I'm doing wrong. And, kind of all of the what ifs of, now I have a house in DC and it ain't cheap here. And, just kind of which direction should I go in? And I'm almost 40, and do we want kids? And do I want to have a job that has parental benefits and all, and it's just like,
spinning the checklist.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Checklist is going.
So it's just, it's all of those things. And so I'm not necessarily trusting myself, because I know where I'm at right now is wrong. But I am having a hard time figuring out how to move forward. So I think learning to trust yourself it's always a process, because sometimes you will more than you do. And I think, again, if you're in alignment, or if you have some momentum, I think it's easier to trust that whatever the decision you make is, if it's the right one or the wrong one, you'll just keep moving forward. But when you're feeling stuck, it's a lot harder to trust yourself, because it's a vortex. So
I like that. It is kind of a vortex, isn't it?
A really good way to put it. It's a really, really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like Corey and I encounter so many women in that spot of, that's why people come to coaching usually.
Yeah. While you were talking,
stuck.
I immediately thought of a client that I'm working with that's in the best way that you put it. She's in a vortex, and it's and I sit there and I watch it. I watch it play out on social, and then I start. Well, why'd you do that? I don't know. I'm just grasping. I'm like, just be still. Just be still for a minute.
And that is so hard. That's so hard.
Your
hardest thing to do. Yeah.
Well, and it's just like again, I think we have it as a whole society in general, because we have the whole hustle culture. You got to climb the ladder. You got to get a bigger house. It's always like climb. We're not, as a culture, good at
just being okay. Just being.
Yeah. And so I think you feel like you're not doing anything. It's like, well, I'm useless, or because I was, and again, this is where social media can be bad. I was reading through, and it's like the whole Tim Ferriss, optimize every moment of your day, that whole culture and stuff. I'm like, not for me, and if it allows some people to they optimize whatever their email outbox, and then that allows them to go spend time surfing or whatever. That's cool. But the whole idea of like having to optimize to me is just
get
like
stressed out over just doing
it's suffocating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's where
it's not for everyone. And that's where I think that whole high performance culture, even the coaching, like there's so many coaches that are all about getting you to max performance and maximum output. And it's like, well, that's for some people. That's not for everyone.
Well, that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately is like, okay, what do I want, life to kind of look like in this next transition stuff? I'm like, I don't want to be an executive at a Fortune 100 company, like, I don't want to work that hard for somebody else. And for what? Because at the end, we all die and no one's going to give like really how many people on the planet have an impact on humanity in like the long run or whatever, or like, what is the point of becoming the CEO of Twitter?
No one's going to give a shit.
No one cares.
Right. Yeah. And so it's just like, you kind of more of that, like, okay, what do you value in? Is that, okay, like you want to be the CEO of a small local business that then you can create opportunities for people in your community? Or do I just want to go, start a homestead in West Virginia or something like that and kind of just live the slow life and engage with that? Because it's like at the end of the day, it's like what matters, and trying to figure that out right now. And that obviously changes kind of at different stages in life. So
I always remember my dad would always tell me, what they say about, the dash between the date of your birth and the date of your death, that's your legacy. And I remember when I got to the space where I was just like, okay, I don't want to work for somebody else. I don't want to do this. And it was like, I'm put on this earth for more than this. And I don't want my obituary to read, she was a great office manager, or she was a great insurance person. Okay, great. No one cares. No one cares.
Yeah.
What did you do while you were here? What is that? What is your legacy? What is that dash? And that's what everybody, I think, with the hustle culture, everybody's trying to keep up with the Joneses, and to the client that I work with, she's just like, well, my friends are doing this and my friends are posting this. I'm like, are they really though? Are they?
Yeah.
Like, are they happy if that's what they're doing? Because that's the most important thing. How's your happiness level? And it's just,
Well, and what are you?
I'm trying not to. Go ahead.
Say, what are you trying to create for yourself?
Yeah.
Like, I'm much more of I lean into the feelings people are trying to capture for themselves.
Yeah.
And I always think, okay, there's how you want to personally feel, but it's also most of the women I deal with are very heart-centered type women. And I always ask too, how do you want other people to feel? Like, that's the legacy. Like, how did you make them feel?
Yeah.
Did you create community? Is that where your heart was? Did you go off and live on a farm and live off the land? Like,
what did you do? How did you?
I'm like, did you supply food to people? Like, did you provide some service that made you feel good? Because I can already tell, Kat, you want to have some sort of impact or legacy to Corey's point. And it's not like we have to think we're going to change the world. I mean, such a utopian thing to be like, we're going to leave this imprint, but like any sort of feeling of like, I came here, I made some sort of difference.
And it's going to continue when I'm gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something I feel like I've been thinking a lot about lately too, is like the words of like average and ordinary. And because, sometimes I'm like, I'm not necessarily where I want to be, or it's like, I'm so driven and ambitious. And like, why am I, not, the founder of Bumble or, or kind of being in this space where I feel like I'm more, successful than I am and whatnot. But again, it's because, I've made other choices of quitting my life and moving to New Zealand for a year. And that's not something I would change, even though life could have looked very differently had I not done that. And just thinking about like, okay, why am I so average or why am I so ordinary? And like, because again, it's like, whatever, you die or not Elon Musk, thank God. But like, that's a name that'll live down in history. But it's like, there's 8 billion people on the planet. Like average and ordinary, like I think a lot of times it's like you all have to be doing more or get hustle culture or, get X number of followers on TikTok and whatever. And it's like, it's okay to be average and ordinary. Like there is nothing wrong with that. And I think that's something, I don't know that anyone ever made me feel that way, or if I just felt that way. Because I was always driven. I was a straight A student. I was a varsity athlete, like I just always like had that goal line to get to. And I never spent that time exploring what I cared about or what I valued. And so I'm kind of doing that a little bit later in life. And just trying to like reframe those words of like average or ordinary, or what is success to you. And I think something I've kind of landed on is, I think why we're all here is like to create, and whatever that means is something different to people, whether it's like creating a family or creating a business or creating wealth or creating art, like I think that's what I've tried to land on is what do I want to create, and kind of put it in that frame for myself, and not be hard on you don't have to create, the greatest next tech thing. You can create community that helps your neighbor or whatever. And that's oftentimes a lot more important and has more impact.
Do you enjoy your days and what you do? Because I think that's underrated too, like the enjoyment factor. Because I think we can get really caught up in the mission and we want to make it this big thing. But it's like, do you enjoy your day?
You like what you're doing?
You like what you do?
Because if you don't,
I think emotions.
Yeah, if you don't like it,
and I think and I think it's something I've always kind of struggled with too. Is like, okay, I'm upper middle class, white lady and stuff, and there's so much suffering in the world, and it's like you should be doing more to help people and stuff, and it's like you kind of feel guilty if you're enjoying what you do, whatever, making, I don't know, whatever, concrete dog biscuits. It's like that's not going to have a drastic impact.
Hey, someone's dog is really happy.
I think dog loves them. Somebody's dog
right?
Loves them.
Yeah. And that's like, okay, like, again, it's all like, I kind of come back. I'm trying to bring myself back to a lot of times of like, you can't love somebody else until you love yourself. And, so it's like, if you're in a happy place, if you're in a place where you're content with your life, you're going to have better impact than if you work for an NGO that maybe you get paid, 20 grand a year and can't afford your life. And then you're stressful and negative to the people around you and stuff. So
been there. Yeah. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Not fun. Not fun.
No.
Well, I want to go back to this like original transition we're talking about, because I feel like I've talked to a lot of women recently that are contemplating moves. Because for whatever reason, when we feel stuck or stagnant, that's usually one of the things we think to do. Like maybe it's my environment, right? Maybe I need a change of scenery. I need to go somewhere else. But there's a lot of fear, especially people that have always been in one place.
Yeah.
So what, if any advice you would give someone who's contemplating a move, knowing you've done this many, many times, sometimes without even really thinking about it, right? You're like, I'm just going to do this. Most people probably don't do that. They're like trying to decide like, oh, do I pick up and move somewhere else? Like, what would you be looking at these days? Because you say you're a little bit more methodical now. What?
So I think, especially I think listening to that, I think again, that's one of those things like your gut, women's intuition, whatever, your heart, whatever it is, like it knows, like if you're misaligned, it knows. And I think one of the biggest things that, I had a friend say at one point is like, you leaving doesn't mean you can't come back. And that you can't, like you come back and you'll have a different perspective on what this place is like, and kind of your situation in it. So like, and I think it is something I've learned is like, you leave for a year or whatever, and you come back, not much has changed, right? Like everyone else's life has kind of continued on and stuff. So you can come back and it might look different to you. And that can be really hard because now you have a different perspective than the people, that maybe you interacted with previously in the same place. I think not having stuff is so freeing, like, cause I didn't have a ton of stuff when I was in my 20s. So I lived in, small apartments and would just sell all the, IKEA furniture, like furniture you bought off of Facebook Marketplace. So it wasn't necessarily stuff you cared about holding on to, but then putting everything in a storage unit. I mean, I had a storage unit probably for like 5 years, like on and off, because I'd put stuff in storage and then, move out to Colorado and come back and get it or whatever. And just not having stuff feeling like it's tying you down and giving you that freedom to be able to make those decisions was really good. Obviously, it can be hard to let go of your stuff, especially if that's what makes you feel like right now I'm nesting in our house and making this first time I've ever owned a house and creating my space and, buying the furniture I want or decorating the way I want and stuff like that. But yeah, I think, for me, again, it's the change, the idea of the change and listening to other people's opinions is scarier than making the decision to do it. And so if you can find somebody who has done it, I will talk to anyone. I will convince you to do it. I'm happy to talk to anyone who's considering that type of transition. Because you'll get a lot of the, oh, well, I wish I could do that, or you're so brave. And it's like, well, you can do it. Just fucking do it. Like, grab a glass of wine and buy a plane ticket.
Deal with the rest later.
Yeah. It's like, there are, every action has a reaction. So it's just, and it's not necessarily good or bad. It just is, So it's like, if you choose X, you're also choosing Y, that outcome. And so if that means it's going to be you're going to leave a high powered career, that means it's going to be harder to get back into one, or it's going to be harder to make a jump. Like, that's just the way it is. And you're going to have to kind of figure out what that means at that time. But I think I'm a big person of your environment is so much of like your energy level, and of who you are and your place and your community, and being unaligned with that, is a big thing. And that's, DC, there's so much I love about DC, but finding my community here is really difficult. Whereas in other places, like when I lived in Colorado or Asheville or New Zealand, you're so just effortless.
Yeah.
My sister lived in Colorado for a little while, and her trying to find her community there was a lot harder. So it's like, to everyone trying to find their community, it's not going to be in the same place. So New Zealand was a place that was really easy for me. Anyone listening to this podcast, that might not be the place for you. Maybe it's France or Chile or New York or, wherever.
Yep.
So yeah, I think finding where that place, what's calling you, I think listening to that is huge. It's really, I'm not going to tell you it's not scary. It's really scary. But again, I think the more you make scary decisions, the more confident you are in making decisions, and they don't feel so scary. And then you're making bigger and bigger scary decisions more confidently.
100%. Yeah. I mean, as someone who's moved around quite a fair bit myself too, not by choice most of the time either, because I think that's a whole different discussion too, where like you're at the mercy of your partner or something where it's not like, I'm choosing to move here. That can be tricky, but I do know that your environment has a huge impact on just your mental health. And there was one place in particular that I lived where I was like, I cannot be here. Like, this does not align at all. And it was a very stressful time. And it was a really hard conversation with my partner at the time, because I was like, I don't want to be here. I know this is where your job is. Kind of maybe some of the feelings you're having, Kat. Like, I love that you love your work here, but like, this is not my place. And I'm like spiraling into this depression, and I need to get out of here. And trying to figure out where you're going to go. So I think as a kind of to round it out, talk about like how you look at evaluating where you're going to go. Because I know community is probably a piece of that for you. Like, where can I go plug into a community? But what else are you looking at when you're like, oh, where do I want to move, or what would align with me?
I think it's one of these things, like I always I don't necessarily know that I always like kind of define it necessarily. Again, it's like I ricochet between like big city and kind of smaller town living, because I lived in Asheville, and Asheville's great, but Asheville's a bubble, and not necessarily like a career town if you're not creating your own business, or it was a big service kind of based town because it's a pretty touristy area and stuff. But there's people doing all sorts of amazing things there. So then I moved to DC because there's so much I love about DC. People speak a million languages and they've lived around the world, and you can get some of the best food. And but then there's some challenges with living in a city too, where it's a transitory city because of the government, because people are here for government agencies to kind of come in and out. And I would say there's trying to find like an entrepreneurial or creative or an outdoorsy community is a lot harder here. I'm not saying it doesn't exist here, but it's harder to kind of find and break into. So yeah, I mean, I think, I look back at my life in Colorado, and again, I had a really great community of people there, and I helped start a co-working space, and that just created this other great community. And I had another great community that was all into, climbing and mountain biking and skiing and really great outdoorsy people. So I have a huge group of people out there. But I left Colorado because I felt like a lot of times it didn't necessarily I was also very much a bubble. Colorado, I love to think Colorado is the center of the universe, and it's an amazing, stunning, beautiful place. And again, you have a lot of people who enjoy doing the same things. But I moved there as Trump was getting elected, and people don't necessarily talk about what's going on in the rest of the world and stuff. And so I felt like that was a bubble. And that's why I wanted to come back to DC when I had a job opportunity here to kind of be around people who had a more kind of global and diverse perspective on things. So
yeah,
I think for me, it's just like, and especially now, it's like, obviously, where can I afford to live in the type of lifestyle that I want? Like, I don't want to live with 6 roommates anymore. Do I want to be able to own property so I can start creating wealth and stuff that'll kind of create different goals for me in the future? Do I want to move somewhere that feels like it's growing and it's booming, and that's bringing in people from all over? Like, again, Denver's bringing in a ton of people out of the tech scene. There's obviously that big outdoor industry, the real estate's blowing up. Marijuana, that's your thing, and craft beer, that's a huge thing out there. So trying to like find out food has become something really important to me in the last few years. Because I got together with my partner Jeremy, and it was the first time I've like had a partner and being able to like cook together, and we both love food, and we love eating out at good restaurants, and I really want to get to know farmers around here, and having dinner parties, and just like that for me is something I would love to. I know you lived in Portland for a little while.
Yep.
Lauren, but like just getting to explore the food scene, because there's like a whole community and culture around that. So for me, it's just like, what am I interested in? Jeremy works in emergency management, and I used to as well. And being around that kind of community is a different type of people that have a nucleus to them and stuff. So just getting what's pulling you to a place, and really kind of listening to that, and like, am I willing, if I want to move to New York, am I willing to live in a shoebox and pay $6,000 a month, for it? Because you have that experience of living in, a place that is so high energy and so dynamic.
Yep.
And, I think kind of some people do pro cons lists. I think, whatever I've made my decisions, most of the time it's more based on gut. Sometimes it's based on decisions, or, like bullet points on a checklist, but a little bit less so. There's still a lot of places I'd like to go.
And I think that speaks to like everyone has to figure it out somewhat on their own terms. Like if you're a checklist person, pros and cons, do that. It all goes back to just being in alignment with the place you're at, and that you always can go back to where you were. Because I think a lot of people think once it's so final, like if I leave, it's done.
It's not. You can actually leave for a while and then come back, and it may actually be better.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I did. I left Arizona in 2020 during the pandemic, moved to 2 different cities in that span of 2 years, and moved back.
Yeah.
It was like, it felt in alignment. And
your perspective changes, your life has changed. So, it's okay to go back.
Yeah. And I think trying to not look at it as like a failure of like, oh, I didn't make it somewhere else, or like I'm coming home, like even I was with a friend's friend, she's moved back to Gainesville, which is where she's from. And she's like, I never thought I moved back here, because she came back from the Bay Area. But there's all sorts of cool stuff going on in Gainesville. It's like the music scene and the food scene, and a lot of people she grew up with are starting really cool businesses and restaurants. And I never thought I'd come back, but it's like it's all in like alignment right now. And just don't look at it like you're coming home with your tail between your legs. Like, again, it's you come back with a different lens on things. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, we always like to wrap things up with what are you currently in transition around? It kind of sounds like when I was reading your bio, there's a lot that you're contemplating. But what about this thing with the WC?
Yeah. I want to ask about the WC.
Yeah, so WC is an idea I've had for probably like 10 years, and it's like expanded and contracted, and I've just never done it because I'll get into like analysis paralysis of like, my idea gets so big that I'm like, I get overwhelmed, and now I'm like, okay, just start with a newsletter. But I've been saving, resources again for about 10 years, and there's so many out there, but the idea is more just of getting resources into women's hands and information easily accessible to women's hands. Everything from these are, VC companies that invest in women-owned and women-founded companies to these are scholarships available to women pursuing arts degrees, or these are grants, or these are, women-owned businesses that you can support, or a women-owned painting company, to just essentially, it's like, I would love to create like a searchable database of resources for women and girls, whether that's events, jobs, funding opportunities, women just doing cool things, communities like Catalyst and stuff that people may not have heard about through their regular channels and stuff like that. But yeah, creating eventually the idea is to have it be like a big Yelp of women, essentially, where you can kind of support and promote opportunities and resources for women. I call it the WC. I used to want to call it the Nushu Project, which I'm not going to because cultural appropriation, but Nushu is a language from the Sahel region in southern China, where women were not allowed to receive education. So they created and you'd go from your family home into your husband's home. And so they created like a written language that they would use to teach each other lessons and life lessons and pass lessons down from mother to daughter and stuff like that. So the idea was just, I'm always like, women know, like you can see each other from across the room, and it's just like, what's up, like if they need an out from the situation they're in, or if, you kind of have that whole communication. It's just about that language of women. So I love that idea about calling it the WC, just like, kind of a play on the WC, like the water closet toilet, because, men share information and make business deals in the bathrooms all the time, or around the water cooler, information getting shared around the water cooler, but then also just the women's company. So I thought it was all just kind of a good play on all of those things of just men share information to one another all the time and kind of help each other out. And I just would love to see more of that for women, and women supporting women, and knowing where those resources and opportunities and support is.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be excited to see what comes of the WC. For anyone that wants to connect with you around transition to a new city, new country, or hear about what you're doing with WC, how can they get in touch with you?
Instagram probably might be one of the easiest ways. It's at Wile, CATWILE. And then the WC will be up soon to be the WC.co. So we'll have that.
Awesome.
Soon too.
We'll put that in the show notes. We so appreciate having this conversation. We know we could have gone in like a billion directions.
I feel like I did. I kind of
we touched on a lot of things. We're like, oh, we can explore that on a future date.
Yeah, definitely.
We appreciate it, because I definitely want to go down the FBI route a little bit more.
Yeah.
I kind of want to. She touched on Nepal. I kind of want to know about Nepal.
Yep. So many things. Yeah. But we appreciate you. Thanks for spending the last little over an hour with us. We'll be excited to have you back in the future. And thanks everyone for listening. Another episode of In Transition. All right.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We appreciate our listeners more than you could ever know. If you liked any part of what you heard, please, please, please do us a favor and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're willing to go a step further, we would love for you to leave us a review and send this episode to a friend that you feel would be served by it in any way. We are so excited to finally share more about Catalyst, the community that we are building in conjunction with this podcast. Our mission with Catalyst is to create an authentic, safe, and inclusive space for heart-centered, growth-minded, multi-passionate women to navigate their life's transitions by building meaningful relationships, learning from one another, and growing into the best version of themselves, and maybe even make the world a little bit better in the process. If you're interested in becoming a founding member of Catalyst, we would love to learn more about you and have you apply at wearecatalyst, all one word, .social. We only have a limited number of spots for this founding member round, so be sure to get your application in soon. Again, the website to apply is wearecatalyst.social. We look forward to the possibility of getting to know you on a deeper level and supporting you in navigating your life's transitions. We cannot wait to have you join us for the next episode. Until then, we encourage you to lean into your community and embrace the growth that inevitably happens when you're in transition. See you guys next week.